Okay, so for question 2, they ask us to consider this square here, and they ask what percent of the big square is shaded. Okay, so this is the big square and this is the amount that's shaded. How many of the squares is shaded here? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 12 little shades are shaded inside this big square. So how many squares are shaded? 12 squares. Okay. How many squares are there in total? Well, the total amount of squares tell me how many total squares are in this big square. So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then this is another 10. 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. So the total squares would be 100 squares. Okay, so if I was to describe this picture in a sentence, it would pretty much say 12 squares out of a total of 100 squares are shaded. So this sentence would describe that picture. 12 squares out of a total of 100 squares are shaded. Is there another way to write that sentence? Is there a way to write that sentence using math? Sure. 12 squares out of a total of 100 squares are shaded. Okay, so we took that sentence and wrote it as a fraction. Did I answer the question yet? Not quite, because the question didn't ask for a fraction. The question asked for a percent. And what is a percent? Remember what percent means? If I asked you going back to question 1, what does 15% mean? 15% means 15 out of every 100. That's the definition of 15%. So in this fraction says 12 out of 100, and there's only 100 squares here, so I don't have to say every 100 here because there's only one 100 here. So 12 out of that 100, if I wanted to interpret that as a percent, what would it be? Okay, so that would be 12%, because by definition 12% means 12 out of every 100. And since there's only one 100 here, this would be 12% out of this 100. Okay, so it's question 2. There you have for question 2. How about question 3? Question 3 says Attila has planned a 48-mile hike for a long weekend. If he has covered 75% of this distance by the morning of the last day of his hike, how much further does he have to walk? Okay, so again, this is our starting amount is not a 100, so we can't use the out of every 100 method, but we can use the benchmark method. Okay, so for the benchmark method, the starting amount for this question would be what? 48. So they ask us to find 75% of this distance. So how do we think of 75%? Are there other percents that we can use to help us get to 75%? Sure. If you remember from phase 1, we thought of 75% as 50% plus 25%. So once we find those, then we could find 75%. So how do we find 50%? 50% we could think of as half of the starting amount, or 100%, because starting amount is the 100%. Okay, so half of the starting amount. That's how we think of 50%. That's half of the starting amount. So what would be half of 48? Okay, I'll let you figure that out on your own. So whatever that half amount is, that would be our 50%. And then now we need to find 25%. How do we think of 25%? Well, we could think of 25% as half of 50%. Okay, so once we find 50%, whatever that amount is, we could find 25% by finding half of that. Okay, so to find 75% means that I have to add this amount with this amount to, and whatever that amount is would be our 75. That amount would be our 75% according to this. Okay, and I'll let you guys try to figure this one out on your own. Feel free to contact me with questions about this one, and attend our session with questions if you had trouble figuring it out. But you should attempt it first and try to come to an answer, and then you can verify with me whether that answer is right. Okay, I'll come back with the next question.